Welcome to the new season of Data Skeptic. From now through the end of the year, you're tuning in for Data Skeptic Ad Tech. It's all about the technology that drives the online advertising industry, the systems, the algorithms, and the emergent phenomenon that they cause. There's a lot of angles here, which is why I've given myself a couple of months on this one. So how to start such an epic season? Well, my least favorite way for a speech to start is when someone quotes the dictionary. Maybe adjacent to that would be a quote, but I actually have a really good quote here to kick this off. This comes from John Wanamaker. You've all heard this. He's an 1800s guy, owned some stores, was important in marketing. And according to Wikipedia, he only supposedly said this, but the quote is, "Half the money I spend on advertising is wasted. The trouble is, I don't know which half." And quite frankly, I'm surprised he only thought half of his money was wasted at that time. When I was young, not in the 1800s, we didn't have cable television, so I watched the 5 or 6 channels of broadcast that we got. I grew up in the 80s watching TV shows from the 60s with ads about diabetes, hover rounds, class action lawsuits, and an assortment of other products very poorly targeted to the suburban youth demographic I fell into at the time. My interests were comic books and QBasic. Radio advertising was equally generic, but who can blame these broadcast mediums? The technology of the 80s didn't yet support personalization or targeting of any kind. Maybe newspapers could have. It's entirely possible data analysts at the time were doing some hocus pocus with census data. But the internet offered not just the opportunity for digital advertising, but for unprecedented targeting of advertising. In fact, the kind of targeting that will go on from the 80s till now to create several backlashes. An overall, I would say, loss of consumer trust, multiple acts of Congress, and thankfully, the technology being created with a privacy-centric design some of the time, the kind of thing that consumers should be expected to have. I'm personally thankful for a certain degree of targeting. If you visit dataskeptic.com, you'll find a small ad on most pages. The product or service might not be exactly what you need, but it won't be far off from someone that listens to this show. And it won't be creepy, for sure. So what would you prefer, the ad you find at dataskeptic.com? Instead of that, some class action lawsuit ad? Or maybe a male enhancement ad? Targeting certainly has its benefits. Also, advertising pays the bills at Data Skeptic HQ, ladies and gentlemen. Not just here, but advertising generates most of the revenue for several large tech giants. There's another old anecdote, something about an airline that saved like 40 grand a year by going from 2 olives to 1 olive in the salad they served. I have no idea if that's true, doesn't matter. Take that fortune cookie wisdom and realize that for a company like, Google, that can make as much as $400,000 per minute, there's certain to be a great deal of experimentation and optimization to be done deep into the 8th, 9th, 10th, 20th decimal place. This is the domain of algorithms and machine learning. Now, as best as I can tell, most modern advertising still carries the creative message that's been authored by a human being. But who that ad reaches, how often it reaches them, and how much it costs to reach them, those are all decisions that have long been succeeded to algorithms. And with new technology like DALL-E, the days of human creative input on advertising may also be numbered, or at least certainly evolving. Advertising is no longer driven by visionary gurus directly. It's now a cold-blooded, performance-based system. As soon as the algorithms outperform the guru, the algorithm wins the game. It would be truly surprising if you didn't see at least a couple of display ads a day. And most of those display ads are actually the result of a real-time auction taking place. There are a bunch of APIs out there that are going to get called when you go to some website, and they've got some very small time period, like maybe 50 milliseconds, to respond with, would they pay for your impression? Impression is when there's space for an ad to be shown. Obviously, you're going to build data-driven algorithmic systems, and we'll look into how those operate. Now, naturally, we can't talk about ad tech without at least a few deep dives about privacy. Now, on the brighter side, perhaps techniques like homomorphic encryption can be the key to a privacy-first set of data-driven solutions that can give users a rich experience while simultaneously protecting their privacy by design. We're a long way off from that, and there's likely to be a number of fumbles along the way. So we'll certainly touch on privacy, but not just privacy, but fraud. Listeners, the digital advertising world is absolutely ripe with fraud. Ho, some of the stuff I have seen. The emperor truly has no clothes. So much fraud. It's incredible. We're going to cover just the tip of that iceberg. What would John Wanamaker have said if he lived in a world where botnets click your ads? And not just that, but actually complete, otherwise legitimate automated e-commerce purchases in an effort to trick the fraud detection systems. So much cat and mouse. So much fraud. So between how online advertising works, the algorithms that run those systems, the people that try and cheat at those systems, privacy, machine learning, you guys get the deal. It's Data Skeptic Ad Tech. Let's do a couple of ads, and after that, I'm going to give you a rundown on everything I know about pay-per-click advertising. Hi, I'm another one of those podcast ads that you've managed to tune out so effectively. It's okay, I get it. Listening to podcasts comes with some degree of ad fatigue. But today, you need to listen up because I'm here to tell you about ad fatigue's sinister cousin, alert fatigue. Did you know the average company receives 11,000 security alerts each day? How can a security team stay on top of the most critical threat risks when they can't find the signal in all the noise? Well, they can't, which makes it easy for IT teams to fall victim to alert fatigue, making your company dangerously vulnerable. So you have two choices. Buy all the tools you can until you've made your security operations overwhelmingly complex and totally ineffective, or you can run with the pack. Arctic Wolf is the industry leader in security operations solutions, delivering 24/7 monitoring, assessment, and response through their patented concierge security model. Arctic Wolf works with your existing tools and becomes an extension of your existing IT team, and they never get fatigued. Got your attention now, didn't I? Visit arcticwolf.com/skeptic to learn more. That's arcticwolf.com/skeptic. Thanks to our sponsor BB Edit from Bare Bones Software. If you're a Mac user and you have any need whatsoever for a text editor, which, let's face it, that's got to be all of us, you have got to check out BB Edit. BB Edit 14 provides Mac users the most powerful, professional-grade text editor around. It's known as capable and rock-solid, and can process files that are large enough to bring other editors to their knees. This tool's been beloved for over 25 years, and I can understand why. If I'm just typing up some simple hello world, I guess any text editor will do. But when I really get into the weeds and need to do some data processing, maybe I've got a big messy file, I need to find all the non-ASCII characters and remove them, BB Edit's there for me. It has best-of-breed multi-file search and replace and great scripting support for text transformations. There's a whole menu of text transformations that you'll find handy. If you're a serious data scientist or software engineer, you're going to bump into situations where you need a powerful text editor. So download and try BB Edit today. You can get it at www.barebones.com. See how much your productivity can increase. barebones.com and download BB Edit. When it comes to digital marketing, data science can help in multiple ways. But primarily, such efforts are towards spending the budget in some intelligent way. Now, for many businesses, that can mean building brand awareness. That's essentially where I'm at with Data Skeptic. Although people every day search for car insurance or cheap car insurance, very few people search for free data science podcast. And those people are probably going to find me anyway. So instead, the best thing for Data Skeptic would be for me to spend broadly and get the show introduced to new people who haven't heard of it before. And although you use the same digital marketing tools, there's generally a different philosophy. What I'm going to cover today is performance-based marketing. Performance-based marketing involves some sort of return on investment or ROI being calculated. For every dollar you spend, you need to bring in at least $1.01 back to the company. Hopefully a lot more than that, really. If I were instead focused on selling Data Skeptic t-shirts, the sale would be what's called my conversion point. It's where I took you from being a speculative visitor and converted you to being a paid customer. This process is broadly known as the marketing funnel. So step one is getting in front of people. If you're doing search engine marketing or SEM, that means engaging with the search engine to get your ad placed on their search results page. Now, every time your ad shows on that search result page, or maybe is viewed as part of some email marketing campaign, that's called an impression. And generally speaking, an impression means a unique person saw your ad. How unique they are is up for debate, and whether or not they actually saw the ad is often also up for debate. But nonetheless, an impression is the event in which your message gets digitally in front of a potential customer. Next step in the funnel, some sort of interaction has to happen. The most straightforward one is clicking on your ad and being taken to your website. Although with the growth of social media, some companies look at that a little differently. Here I'll explain a more traditional marketing path. Saw your ad, that's an impression. Interacted with it, that's a click. And we get our first interesting statistic, the click-through rate, the ratio of clicks to impressions. Your ad is shown 100 times. Out of those 100, 10 people click on it. That's a 10% click-through rate, which would actually be amazingly high. Click-through rate in email campaigns is astonishingly low, usually below 1%. Search engine marketing, in my experience, tends to be a single-digit number if you're doing very well, 3-4%, sometimes higher. But that's when your search terms are highly targeted and highly converting. Someone searching for car insurance probably wants to buy car insurance in the near future. Someone searching for how to get my business more focused on machine learning, that's a bit speculative. A lot of these broader search terms, as they're called, or keywords, I'll see those match under 1%, but your mileage will certainly vary. A strong brand name and a good ad matters for a lot here. Alright, so once that click has happened, a new visitor, or hopefully new visitor, is now on your website. If you're a business focused on generating revenue, there's some conversion event awaiting that new visitor. That could be something like checking out on an e-commerce site. If the business wants to reduce the friction, which is highly recommended, maybe that conversion point is instead something like signing up for a lead generation form. So rather than buy your car insurance right here, fill out your name, phone number, and a few questions, and you'll get an instant quote, or someone will get back to you, or whatever. The point is, the business has now captured your contact information, or as much of it as you're willing to share. There's a whole interesting rabbit hole of data science problems there. Which of these leads should be prioritized? Do you want to filter out the ones that look fake? If you can algorithmically spot the people most ready to purchase, I guarantee you your sales staff would like to know that. But setting aside lead prioritization and filtering, let's pretend like we're a typical marketing team and we don't care about that. We're focused on our blind metrics, primarily the conversion rate, the percentage of people who, after clicking on the site, then went on to convert. So out of, let's say, 20 new customers brought in, one makes a purchase. That's a 5% conversion rate. Now that's compounding on top of the click-through rate. So of your total impressions, multiply by your click-through rate, multiply by your conversion rate, and that's the expected number of new events, new conversions you can probably generate with that same number of impressions. How do you improve a click-through rate? There's a number of options here, but broadly speaking, it's better targeting, so refining who gets to see it down to a more appropriate audience, or picking better search terms. And secondly, the ad. Can you make a more enticing, more accurate, more compelling, in some way more click-worthy advertisement? That way a larger percentage of the overall impressions will end up at your site. Now be careful of clickbait here, because just because you can generate the clicks doesn't mean they're going to convert like the old ones converted. But if traffic is truly fungible, and you can increase that click-through rate, you should see a subsequent increase in your conversions. What if after that or independently we want to now improve the conversion rate? We'll realize that conversion rates really begin when a person sees that page. In fact, startlingly so. You would think that if I get you at the top of the page, like I'm the most prominent ad, versus I get you by being the last ad on the page, that somehow that top ad click would convert better. That has never been true in hundreds of independent campaigns I've run. For whatever reason, conversion rate is independent of the position of the ad you clicked on. So being in the first position on Google search results does have an advantage in prominence and in getting a higher volume of clicks, but it does not seem to be true that they are higher quality clicks. And this is kind of promising. This means wherever you get your traffic from, whether you're the first listing or the fifth, once someone arrives at your site, their conversion decision, whether or not they're going to engage with you, is independent of what rank you were at on the search results page. So don't worry about it. You don't need to model it, unless you want to verify what I just said, which you should. Trust but verify, as they say. But given that that's independent, we can focus on how do I make a better converting landing page. Sometimes that's having multiple landing pages and doing some A/B testing. There's a great place for a data scientist to help out. More often than not, though, it's fixing issues on that landing page. User interface issues primarily. Things you didn't think of, things that are confusing, anything that could stand in the way of the customer doing the conversion event. Maybe your form validation is too strict. Maybe you require too many fields. Maybe you ask too many things. A data scientist can help you acquire and interpret the data points necessary to answer questions like that. Or realistically, better understand the trade-offs. Make your form simpler, and yes, more people will complete your form. Will that generate overall more or better business for you? That's a harder question. But the truth about the performance metrics will be very clear in the data. The interpretation you'll probably need some help with. So how does all this get paid for? Generally speaking, there are three methods: pay-per-impression, pay-per-click, and pay-per-conversion. Pay-per-impression is still fairly common in email newsletters, in podcasts, and things like that. There's a certain audience size that the ad is going to be distributed to. So in cost-per-impression-based advertising, you'll hear people announce a CPM. For every 1,000 people we contact or get your message in front of, you pay X dollars. Now that's great for a publisher, and very simple, and very clear and transparent. It's less great for the advertiser. They have to take a certain amount of risk. Do they trust that brand, that the emails on their email list are of high enough quality, or that those emails even get opened? So whatever arithmetic you want to do, divide by 2, divide by 10, there's more of a risk taken by an advertiser to assess the return on investment they're going to get. The publisher is supposed to get paid either way. At the very other extreme is cost per action. Imagine you have a business that sells widgets. Your retail price for a widget is $1, and let's say your advertising budget breaks down to be about 10 cents per widget. Now that's your private information and also probably your decision to make. But hypothetically, let's say a vendor comes along and says, I think I can help you sell more widgets. What if you pay me 10 cents for every widget I help you sell? And if I don't sell any, you don't have to pay me anything. On the surface, that's a sweet deal. All the risk is taken on by this vendor. They just want 10%, which is already what you thought was good for your advertising budget. If they do a bad job in their efforts and don't bring you any new sales, it costs you nothing. Now, hypothetically, it could damage your brand, right? If they do some really bad ads that are poorly misspelled and stuff like that, maybe you want to worry about that. More so, what you actually need to worry about is cannibalization of traffic. What if that vendor finds some way to acquire customers you would have otherwise got but for their meddling? There were, probably still are, but I know back when I was more involved in SEM, there were companies who did, it was kind of a bad service in my opinion. Essentially what they would do is a deal like this, and then they would just bid on your brand name and your products and drive traffic to their webpage. So someone who's already searching for your product's name now has to jump through an additional hoop, and they're going to take credit for the sale, and you're going to have to pay that third-party vendor. So it's not a perfect match made in heaven for sure. The advertiser really needs to still worry about if this is the right agreement for them, but all of the risk is put on the vendor, who in this scenario is the person trying to bring in the new business. They're only going to get paid on the sale, or maybe on the lead. You know, if I tee up someone who might bring their lawsuit to your law firm, whether or not you close the deal is up to you. I made the introduction, you should pay me for that. And there is a fair amount of cost per action or cost per lead based advertising out there. What is the most common form of advertising, or at least certainly within the paid search space, is in the middle of that, cost per click based advertising. This is where money changes hands between the advertiser and the publisher, at the time someone clicks on the ad and goes to the destination, whatever website the advertiser wants them taken to. And this is seen as sort of a Goldilocks spot. The advertising platform, like Google, does take on a certain amount of risk. What if you have a terrible ad and they have to show it 1,000,000 times before anyone clicks it? Well, they reserve the right to show your ad less. They have an algorithmic-based way of doing that we'll talk about in a minute. But if Google deems your ad worthy and they start showing it for certain search phrases, and enough people are clicking on it, it will continue to show, at least until your budget runs out. Then Google is delivering traffic to your website, paid traffic, in more or less the flavor you requested. You get to tell it some targeting criteria, some keywords, things like that. And in the PPC world, that's where the search engine has completed their task. They sent you the unique click. It's now on you to have a compelling enough offer for that person to get them to do whatever you want in the operations of your business. So what would you pay per click? I think you would be astounded to find out how high some of these prices are. It's very rare to see CPCs, that's a cost per click, under $1. Sometimes you'll see that on what's called long tail searches, where maybe I search for some 5 or 6 word phrase that doesn't come up a lot, or something highly targeted like my actual product names or my own brand name. Generally, when there's low competition, Google will offer you a very cheap cost per click for buying the traffic. But invariably, it's going to be fairly low volume traffic, otherwise other people would probably be converting for it, unless it's some goofy search term that seems to have no real commercial viable option. But even there, you have people trying to build brand awareness or just buy raw traffic to hit some arbitrary metric their job is based on. So there's always a background noise appetite for pretty much any impression. CPCs, and don't take advertising advice from a podcast. It's going to depend on your industry and a lot of other factors, but I have done a lot of work in this area and would, as a rough heuristic, tell you depending on what you're selling, between $1 and maybe $6 a click is pretty typical. At the time when I was on a small team that algorithmically controlled millions of dollars of spend, we had an arbitrary cap that we chose to put in that, mainly for safety purposes, we would never spend more than $30 per click. Think about that. You went to Google, you typed something in, then maybe you clicked an ad, and Google earned $30 because they showed you an ad, you were interested in it, and you clicked on it. When something is free, you truly are the product. But that's okay. If it's a good ad, if it's something you're interested in, they facilitated that connection. In fact, it was rare, usually due to a bug, when things hit that cap. Although not always. In particular, the word that consistently hit the cap that I would always notice was the word mesothelioma. Not a common search phrase. Probably searched in 1 of 2 cases. Either a medical student or someone researching it, or someone who might have a viable lawsuit claim related to mesothelioma. For a law firm that might take on that case and it become a multi-million-dollar payout for them, they pretty much want to talk to anyone who searches for that term. Thus, a $30 CPC, and remember, you still have to convert them to a lead on top of that. What if it's only 10%? Then it's like $300 per lead. That might still be worth it to that law firm. And of course, if it's worth it to the law firm to pay $30 a click, it's worth it to a bunch of scam artists to set up sites and click on their own ads and try and get that $30 for themselves. Now, of course, Google and Bing and other ad platforms do certainly have some preventative measures in place. But buyer beware. Not only do you need to verify this stuff, but there's a whole gray area to be concerned with. What if I see this as an opportunity and I just start a blog all about mesothelioma? And I legitimately, I read Wikipedia and regurgitate it into blog posts, and somehow that starts getting some traffic. There's nothing intrinsically wrong with that. And maybe those leads will be good leads, who knows? But a large portion of the internet, in particular aggregator sites, really exists only as a consequence of this design of advertising. Search engine marketing is very expensive by most people's standards. So in addition to a data scientist maybe checking for fraud and examining the quality of the traffic, there's a number of optimizations that can be done to a campaign. So let's go back up to the top of the funnel and talk it back down. At the top of the funnel, you generally have 2 options when interacting with a search engine's marketing platform. And this is true on sites like Reddit. I've been playing around with Reddit ads, and to a lesser extent on Facebook and Instagram and other places. So you have some broad targeting options. Targeting by country, I highly recommend, and it's very effective. I mean, an IP address is an IP address. Maybe you lose the traffic of people on VPNs or get some confusing visits, but that's more noise than signal. You also, if allowed, want to target to an appropriate language. Why show an English ad to a Spanish speaker or vice versa? You'll typically have some controls for the campaign, like day parting. You only want it to run 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Central Time, something like that. You'll have a daily budget and some controls around it. Not a lot to optimize there. And then most importantly, your keyword targeting. Now over the years, Google, at least in their user interface, has made it more and more difficult for people to do this level of customization. It's pretty clear their product developers want to remove a lot of these tasks from the person and let Google just automate it. In my personal experience, I would not recommend that. Maybe you want to hire a firm or a company or an independent contractor to do these choices for you, but the margins are too slim on PPC advertising. Someone should be at the helm. So what does it mean to bid on a search term? Or I think I introduced the word bid right there. If you want to show up for a word like mesothelioma, you have to go into Google AdWords or the equivalent on Bing or Reddit or wherever and say that you want to target that word. You may have a few options, like you want to only exact match, that is, people who strictly type that phrase in, or broad match, like as long as that word fits somewhere in the search term they made, or phrase match, like if I bid on Data Skeptic, and I did that as a phrase match, that would match what is Data Skeptic, should I listen to the Data Skeptic podcast, but it wouldn't match for what are good podcasts about the intersection of data and skepticism, because the exact phrase I asked for isn't there. So maybe I'd want to broad match the two words data and skeptic. But that could get me a whole bunch of junk I don't want. There's a lot to be thought of here and a lot of testing to do. Now luckily, and this is maybe the best part about it all, you don't have to think too hard. Just take a risk. Bid on that keyword in some isolated way, use the budgeting tools so you don't break the bank, and wait anywhere between, an hour and a day or two. Suddenly, voila, you have data to work with. Or at least you should. Maybe you targeted something exceedingly rare and there's no search terms, or Google has sandboxed you for some reason. You'll have to fight with them when getting your account set up, perhaps. But if you're going to show for a search term, you'll have some data back very quickly. You'll know your click-through rate, and if you've wired up the right tools on your website, you can also know your conversion rate, right in the same analytics system. This should in theory allow you to make a fast and simple decision. Does this new keyword achieve the return on investment you were looking for? Now, more often than not, if you're new to this, you'll find a lot of your keywords get suspended. Google says, we're not going to run that for you. So they have some behind-the-scenes hocus-pocus that looks at your ad, and I would say they do about a 90% good job on this in my experience. They'll identify, look, this search term is not appropriate for this page. You're a data science podcast, you're bidding on car insurance, this really doesn't make sense, and my ad won't even show. If they didn't have that precaution in place, and my ad showed, let's say, 1,000 times, I presume I'd get literally 0 clicks, unless I had some clickbait ad that was about car insurance, but brought them instead to my podcast. Then I might see a high click-through rate, but a 0% conversion rate. When you work with a firm that has expertise in pay-per-click advertising, they're almost always bringing a list of keywords by industry or something like that and doing some copy and paste wizardry. Maybe if they're a somewhat sophisticated tech group and have a few engineers on staff, they have some custom crawling solution that looks at your website and pulls out keywords. If they're going to do the best possible job and have the budget to do sort of a white glove treatment from you, both of those things will happen, as well as sort of a custom grooming and a looking at these terms with some depth, at least during the initial setup phase to get this campaign right. It's typically easy to figure out what keywords work for your business. There's some iteration and some experimentation, but this is not something that you're going to spend every day on once you get it right. It's sort of set and forget. But let's bring Bayesian statistics into the mix here, because they help a lot. You start bidding on dozens or hundreds of search phrases, or maybe you aggregate those into different ad groups, and you're going to look at those as sort of the collective of how all these keywords perform together. However you want to look at it, you're now generating some statistics. So let's say your ad shows 7 times and gets 0 clicks. That tells you basically nothing. As I'd mentioned, click-through rates tend to be pretty small. You guys should be able to do this math as an exercise. What is the probability that a true click-through rate is 3%, but I've observed 7 impressions with no clicks. Pretty high probability, I'm sure. And although I haven't booked it yet, I've sent out a couple of invites for papers that focus on this area, so I won't go too deep. I'll just tell you the quick and dirty way to approach this. Have some prior. Usually can be as simple as base that prior on all of your historical data. So maybe your global click-through rate is about 3%. Then for any new campaign, just augment it, or if you want to get fancy, I believe this is called Laplacian smoothing. Just add 3 fictitious clicks and 100 fictitious impressions to the numerator and denominator respectively, and calculate your new CTR. So in our example, it's 100 plus 7 impressions and these 3 ghost clicks. So 3 divided by 107, roughly 2.8%. So if we say, hey, we think this campaign is performing at about 2.8%, that's slightly behind your global average, even though it hasn't seen a click yet. But if you need a hard and fast decision rule, like stop any campaign that falls below a threshold, you don't want to accidentally bias to the campaigns that, by chance, happen to get an early click. 2 impressions in 1 click does not guarantee you a 50% click-through rate. So I said to inflate by 100 impressions and the corresponding number of clicks. That's an independent hyperparameter you may have to tune. The bigger the number, the longer it takes for the true data to overtake your prior. So imagine we've set up all of our targeting. We've picked all our keywords. I'm going to skip over the fact that we had ad copy created that someone typed up or did an image for our ad. We'll talk about that extensively in future interviews. So following that, our final step, we have to set bids for either our campaign or more appropriately, we set a bid for every individual search term. Your bid is what you'd be willing, the maximum value you'd be willing to pay if your ad got clicked on. In that job I had that I mentioned, we were willing to pay $30 for clicks on mesothelioma. We also bid on things like clogged bathroom toilet. I don't remember exactly, but I want to say that was maybe a $2 CPC for us. Now I'm wavering here between saying max bid and CPC because they're not technically the same thing. When you put in a bid, you're saying this is the most I would pay. The actual price you get charged is almost certainly going to be different. Well, why is that? It's actually because of something very clever that Google decided to do. Now here I'm going to describe a watered down version of something. Everyone knows Google search, the organic results, really began, or one of the major innovations was the PageRank algorithm. And I'm certain PageRank still plays some role in how Google ranks sites today, but it's certainly a much more complex and sophisticated algorithm that probably PageRank is still involved in. How Google charges you your CPC is a similarly complex and evolving system, but one of the core insights, in the way that PageRank was a core insight, on the auction side, Google picked to use the Vickery auction, or second price auction. I'll first describe what it is and then why it's clever. What it is, the Vickery auction is a second-priced auction, meaning everyone should bid what they'd like to bid, your choice. I'll bid $2 for this click, maybe somebody else bids $3. Whoever bids the most wins the auction. Their ad will get shown. That's fair. That's how it should be. What do you charge them? Not their max bid. Instead, you charge them the max bid, or maybe a penny above it, for the person right behind them in line. So if you were willing to bid $3, and I was only willing to bid $2, you would pay $2.01. Now, if you think about it, that is great from the advertiser's perspective. Getting charged less than some cap is a good thing, because you set the cap. If you thought it was too high, you could lower it. If you thought it was too low, you could increase it. You control the lever. But from Google's perspective, they're going to make less money. Why didn't they charge you the full $3? It's not because they already have a lot of money. They can always have more. No, part of why they got so much money is by picking interesting algorithmic choices like this one. It all breaks down to a little game theory and a little bit on incentives. If you ran a first price auction, that encourages people to bid up the maximum amount. But ultimately, someone is going to have the winner's curse. Whoever wins the auction is ultimately going to overpay by a little bit and have some regret. Do you want your top performer having a lot of regret? Probably not. So what are my incentives as the advertiser? If I set my rate too low, that might be me trying to be cheap, save money, see what I can get at a discounted or reduced price. And that's fine. And if all of my peers are doing the same thing, I guess we could collude and establish an arbitrarily low price. But more often than not, if something is valuable, my peers will offer more than I offer for it. and I'll either have to raise my bid to get as much volume of traffic, or I'll just remain a, second or third tier player. So I'm incentivized to move my bid up as high as I can, and I'm not scared to move it up too high because I know I'm not going to necessarily pay my maximum. I won't break down the proof here, but think about those three scenarios. What happens if I overbid, underbid, or bid exactly? If I overbid, I might lose money by overpaying. If I underbid, I might have regret by not achieving the most results I could. So what's left? I can bid my true valuation. If that click legitimately to me is worth $3, I should just bid $3. If I pay the maximum, I'm still happy. I'll never pay above it. And if the price is potentially lower, I'm also happy. Yet I have no motivation to reduce my price. If I go from $3 to $2.50, I still pay $2.01 unless the second place person has moved a little bit. So the core takeaway about why second priced auctions are great is that they incentivize the participants to bid their true valuations. Think carefully about what something is worth to them and offer that as the price. So there is a lot for a data scientist to do around bid optimization, but not as much work as you would think. There aren't a lot of incentives to play games with this number. Usually it's just a consequence of trying to get the right balance or flow or volume of traffic you're looking for. With enough data, you can model this stuff out. You can find the relationship between what your bid is and what position you show up in the search results. If you can guess what bid gets you into what position, you can also infer how much traffic you'll get for the day. Simple models can take you super far in this respect. So let's now assume we've established all of our max CPCs. We've put our bids in. We now wait. Let's wait and get some analytics data. Hopefully you've launched a couple of different campaigns, so you can A/B test a little bit. Maybe if you want to be fancy, you can even multi-arm bandit this situation. Launch 10 or so ads and apply reinforcement learning to balance the exploitation of having a good ad to use with the exploration of trying new ads. That's fancy down the road stuff. So to summarize the choices you have to make as an advertiser, it's what search terms to bid on, what your ad should say, any demographic targeting you want to do, and what you'll bid on each of those search terms. Those are more or less the set of choices every advertiser has to make. But let's now take a look at the same situation from the platform's perspective. Imagine you worked at the search engine. How do you want to rank the paid ads? Well, the naive thing to do would be to put the highest bid to the top. That's going to be a terrible user experience and likely result in less clicks, so less payment events. It's good for the big company that has the biggest budget because they can keep their bid at the top, but a winning search engine has to please everybody, not just the advertiser with the biggest budget. So the first naive solution is to multiply the bid by the click-through rate. So let's say I have a click-through rate of, 50%, very high, and yours is 25%. If we both bid $1, I should come out on top. Maybe you should bid $2 to be even with me. That's approaching something a little bit more reasonable. If there's an ad no one is clicking on, people probably don't want to see that ad either. So as that click-through rate declines, your bid has to equally go up and up and up, or at least until the market suggests to you that you're bidding in the wrong way, or on the wrong keywords, or what have you. But this isn't going to give us a perfect result. What about a spammy or illegal landing page that has a very clickbaity ad, something that doesn't actually apply to the search term? A dishonest but well-crafted ad could get a lot of clicks and therefore a high click-through rate. By that metric alone, you're creating a perverse incentive. So a good paid search ranking algorithm needs at least one more term. I'm going to broadly call that the quality score and give you the hand-wavy definition. It's just sort of a goodness of the page, in particular a goodness of the page for the search phrase. If I went and tried to bid on data science podcasts, presumably that search engine's going to crawl the landing page and say, does this content apply to the search term he's selected? I think I briefly mentioned that an advertiser should connect conversion tracking on that landing page. It's a way of integrating your conversion events, like a sale or a lead generation, back into the advertising platform. So not only can you see that data alongside your impressions and clicks, but you can optimize towards your highly converting campaigns. I don't believe that most of these ranking algorithms will use that data, primarily because the end user, the advertiser, controls it. I could just say I get 100% conversion rate if I wanted to set it up that way. It wouldn't tell me much, but it would trick you maybe into thinking I was a good quality page. That's a simple perverse incentive, so it's doubtful they're going to use conversion data to calculate the quality score. That's a rabbit hole you can do a deep dive on. I'm sure there's some official material from the various search platforms. But this is an area I would actually recommend not spending too much of a data scientist time on. I'm aware of a lot of people trying to do some data science hocus pocus to guess what it is that gets quality score higher. I don't know that I've ever seen anything useful come out of research like that, except for obvious things. The kind of things you don't need to be told, which could generally be summed up as have good content people actually want to read, rather than trying to fool an algorithm. Do that in good faith, you'll likely get a high quality score on the page. Your page will be crawled, and that'll be part of it. Compare the search terms to the page content. And beyond that, I don't know exactly what all goes into what is certainly a professional secret, but I could guess at a few other factors. For example, the bulk time. Do people click on the page and a few seconds later click the back button to return to the search engine? That seems like a dissatisfied visitor. If your time on page is a lot less than the other ads trying to be placed next to you, maybe that's a bad indicator of your page's quality. So the very crude model of search engine marketing ranking then, all these probably with some parameter scalar in front of them, but your bid multiplied by your click-through rate multiplied by some quality score. That gives you one singular score per page, and you sort those descending. And that needs to be done incredibly fast. All those scores need to be pre-calculated as well. There's a tremendous engineering effort that goes into the calculation, summarization, aggregation, archivization, and everything else for managing this sort of statistics, both for giving the data back to the clients, who are probably going to do some modeling around it, and also for the systems to manage their own performance metrics. There are plenty of other digital advertising offerings. We'll cover a lot of those in future episodes as well. But our interviews, like always, are going to focus more on the technology, the algorithms, and the people building those. An enormous amount of money is spent on online advertising. Algorithms control almost all of it. This is Data Skeptic Ad Tech, our season about how those algorithms work.